Today you've announced tariffs today on the U.S. for the first time, or they'll affect the U.S. for the first time since you pulled back retaliatory tariffs. How do you think this will affect the prospects of a trade deal with the U.S., and are you worried about retaliation?
So I think the first thing to say is that what we have done is to put in place adjustments to remissions and tariffs on certain steel derivative products, as you know. And so these are products that, derivatives is a fancy name for products that are substantially comprised of steel. And it is a much more targeted level of that steel than, for example, the United States has done with their steel derivatives, which is quite broad application. The U.S. looks to calculate the proportions in steel. That approach is global. It's global. It's not targeted at the U.S., okay? So that's the first thing that's very important. So it's a global approach which is creating some space for Canadian steel producers to fill in. First point. Second point, with respect to the changes we're making in tariffs, so for non-free trade countries, going from 50% to 20%, the sort of tariff rate quota, this is Bloomberg, so I can talk like that, right? And for free trade countries, going from 100 to 75%, the U.S. is not included in that. So there's no change in the tariff for the U.S. or for Mexico in that regard. So I think that answers the question.
On ending the remission, I'm wondering why you chose January 31st, and is this an attempt to add pressure to the U.S.?
No.
Or is it an acknowledgement that you're not going to get a deal?
I'm going to reinforce. It is a global approach. It is a global approach, and what it is, January 31st, is a judgment based on our working with companies that use these products, and the time in which it can take Canadian companies to ramp up and fulfill that demand. So you don't do it overnight because people have certain relationships, certain contracts as a consequence of that. But you also don't do it a year from now, or else it doesn't have any benefit for the Canadian industry. I mean, this is, it's $10 billion of market share that potentially, or of demand, the steel proportion of that potentially can be captured. So that's the timing is based on the adjustment timetable. There's no signal. There's no signal to any country in the world. It's just there's a signal to Canadian buyers of steel and Canadian producers of steel that there's an opportunity. Yeah.
Next question, kissing.
Hello, Paul Dutch, Global News. When it comes to lowering import quotas for foreign steel imports, are you concerned about any potential retaliation from countries like China?
Well, look, we have we've re-engaged with China and in a very positive way, and the starting of a broader discussion of amongst other things, our broader trading relationship. There's this sector, there's clean energy sector, there's a series of important issues on the agricultural side, the seafood side, there's opportunities for Canada on the lumber side, et cetera, and so those discussions will continue, and it's part of a broader relationship. But look, if you look at what's happening in the world, given the changes, the fundamental changes in tariff policy, you see a number of jurisdictions starting to make adjustments because of the reallocation of capacity. I'll just refer to the European Union currently has proposals around restricting free trade partners to 50% or 48% to be precise, of their previous levels. So,
follow-up?
And to clarify, when you go to the U.S. next week, apart from the FIFA draw, will you be looking to officially restart trade talks with the U.S. again?
Look, it's, again, I don't want to over-dramatize it, so I will repeat that we are ready to re-engage on those talks when the United States wants to re-engage. Nous sommes prêts de recommencer les discussions avec les Américains en ce qui concerne des secteurs stratégiques quand les Américains sont prêts.
Next question.
It's Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News.
Yep.
I'm just wondering if Canadians should interpret today's announcements as a concession that there's no deal in the near future for the steel and lumber sectors.
You should interpret the announcement that this government will do whatever is it takes to protect our sectors, and not just protect them, but to help them reposition for the new global economy, and help them be in a position to build this great country. And we need these sectors to build this country. We're going to build this country at a scale and at a pace, and we need the strong sectors. So we're positioning, this is part of positioning the sector for that.
You mentioned in French that you had a conversation with Donald Trump over the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that, please? And also, when you go to Washington next week, will you bring up with him the pain that our sectors are currently facing and talk about re-engaging?
I'll bring up with him what I bring up with him when I see him. These are points I do make to him. My exchange with the president yesterday was not newsworthy.
So it wasn't about...
I just responded to a question, wasn't newsworthy. How's that?
Next
Yeah.
question.
I think that's for us to decide, though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question.
Bonjour, Andréane
Bonjour.
de Radio-Canada. Pourquoi ne pas avoir consulté votre caucus de la Colombie-Britannique avant de conclure l'entente avec l'Alberta?
Comme j'ai dit il y a quelques minutes, nous avons un processus de caucus très ouvert, beaucoup de discussions. Je suis à l'heure avec les enjeux au Colombie-Britannique. J'ai plusieurs conversations avec eux. J'étais là il y a 10 jours, je crois, pour quelques jours en Colombie-Britannique, par exemple. Alors, il faut, nous sommes le gouvernement, il faut décider.
Question de suivi.
Comment comptez-vous garder la cohésion au sein de votre caucus sur cet enjeu?
OK. Je crois que j'ai déjà répondu à cette question, alors, mais je peux répéter. Nous avons un caucus ouvert, divers, solide, avec une très bonne échange des idées, des politiques, des inquiétudes, des enjeux. Et comme j'ai dit, par exemple, pour cette annonce aujourd'hui, c'est bien informé par quelques membres de notre caucus.
Merci. We'll have time for one last question. Dernière question. Catherine?
Hi, this is Catherine with the Canadian Press. Speaking about today's announcement, I'm wondering if you can share why these measures were not included in the federal budget and if the tariff quotas announced in July didn't go far enough.
Well, I think what we've seen, let me start with the second bit of that, which is that the adjustments, for example, there's been additional tariff measures that have been put on by other countries. For example, the United States with respect to steel derivatives, that process has come into force and has broadened, so that has had knock-on impacts on the sector. So that's one big reason, and in fact that would almost be a sufficient reason to justify, plus the additional U.S. tariffs on lumber. So you have those aspects, and then as I alluded to in one of the earlier answers, you see knock-on effects of what's happening in the U.S. and elsewhere on tariff measures that other countries are taking, or jurisdictions in this case. The European Union would be one example. So all of that sort of comes back onto Canada. First, that's the first, and that kind of enough. Secondly, you learn things as we have facilities in place, the ease with which companies are able to pull down the draw down the money, the terms. So we should always be